Hello and welcome, everybody. Happy Friday. We are here on the Your Strata Property Facebook page and heading out to LinkedIn as well. I am Amanda Farmer, and this is our regular Friday catch-up, chat about the week that was in Strata, and often bringing you a special guest as well. And I do have a special guest joining us here today. I will be welcoming our special guest in very soon. But first, I'd like to know, how are you doing? How has your week been? How's your couple of weeks been? Haven't been here for 2 weeks. We usually schedule these in on a fortnightly Friday. Everyone is busier than ever before. I have been trying to organize an event for women in Strata, which is a group that I started about 5-6 years ago now. And we have for some time wanted to put together a webinar, something pretty ambitious. We haven't done it before. I've done plenty of webinars for Your Strata Property, but a Women in Strata webinar we haven't done yet, but we have committed to deliver one before the end of the year. And I have not been able to get our Strata Manager Steering Committee to find a date that they're all available. You Strata managers are so busy, and just finding dates at this time of year is crazy. So I get it, guys, nuts out there. Today I was doing a Strata search, a records inspection for a client of mine. That's always fun. I actually went in person to the Strata manager's office. That hasn't happened for a little while now. You guys are pretty clever about having things online and giving us online access. So that was a nice change. And how did it go? It went okay. Sadly, there were still some records that should have been there that were not there. Emails. There were no emails produced for inspection. And I see this time and time again. I talk about it on the podcast often. Emails are records of the owner's corporation. Emails that are passing through the Strata manager, committee member correspondence, owner correspondence, everything that's in those busy inboxes. Those emails are records of the owner's corporation, and they need to be produced when there is an inspection. And I have actually taken to specifically requesting everything, listing everything that should be made available under our New South Wales legislation. And still, I'm saddened by the fact that I do not receive, have made available to me emails. So what's going on there? I know we get lots of Strata managers tuning in. I chatted to this particular Strata manager who hadn't produced the emails for me today. And he said, Amanda, but there's lots. I said, yep, I know. And I'd like to see them all. But they're everywhere. They're in my inbox, they're in my sent items, they're in subfolders, and some of the emails are marked confidential, in confidence, not for the file. So I won't be producing those ones to you. And I said, yeah, you will be, because even though they are marked in confidence or not for the file, they are records of the owner's corporation. There is no such thing as in confidence or not for the file. If you are communicating with your Strata manager, if there is committee member correspondence, unless it is an invitation to a barbecue that you're having in your backyard, these are records of the owner's corporation. They need to go on the file. Podcast episodes about that, I'll dig it out for you and post it here so you can check it out. But I'm hoping that the message is sinking in, that slowly we're learning these things, that this is what our legislation provides, and these are the rights of owners and the obligations of secretaries who are managing these records. Now, I am seeing lots of you there coming on in for our Friday chat and looking forward to seeing our special guest, I'm sure. Petra is saying good afternoon. How are you, Petra? And Margaret is here. It says Margaret, but it's Pat. Hi, Pat/Margaret. Good to see you here. If you want to drop me a hello, I always like to know who is here joining us for our Friday catch-up. I definitely have our special guest waiting in the wings, waiting in our virtual green room, and he will be here with us very soon. This week in Strata, we are still talking about pets. Yes, we're still talking about the Horizon and the Cooper decision in the news again this week. We have heard that the Horizon, the owners corporation, has apparently decided not to appeal the decision that was made by our New South Wales Court of Appeal a few weeks ago. That appeal would have been an application for special leave to appeal to the High Court. But we've seen reported in the media, I think it might have been Sue Williams in the Domain, letting us know that the decision's been made not to appeal, and there's actually a new bylaw on the way. So a new bylaw being put together to change or cover, let's say, the position there at the Horizon when it comes to the keeping of animals. And what we're hearing is that it's a bylaw that sets out quite a detailed application process. If owners want to keep pets, then the steps they need to take to get that approval. So that'll be interesting to see play out. We did also see, I think Sue might have reported this as well, that the Roden case had been appealed, that the appeal had been filed in that case. That was a little bit surprising that needed to happen. But it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I think that might have just been a matter of time and logistics, perhaps. See the Roden case play out before the Court of Appeal. If it does, I'm not sure that it will. So we'll see. We've also received, if anyone's on the fair trading database, if you're not, it's a good idea to be on it. New South Wales Fair Trading, they send out emails every few months or so. They have a Strata update email, and there was one of those in my inbox on Wednesday, I think it was, giving an update on the Cooper decision. And there was some interesting wording in that email, which now that I go and click through to the website has actually been changed, or it's different to what was in the email. And the email had said that the Cooper decision, the Court of Appeal had made blanket pet ban bylaws invalid. Now, this is the question that has been flying around. So many of you have been asking it. It's been in my inbox. There's been some confusion in the media. Does this decision mean that all blanket pet ban bylaws are invalid? Now, the technical position is no. The Court of Appeal decided only the validity of Bylaw 14 as it applied in the Horizon. Didn't make a decision that then covers all pet ban bylaws across the state. However, if your bylaw is exactly the same as the Horizon's bylaw, then you can feel pretty confident, or not so confident, if depending on what side you're on, that if the bylaw was challenged in the tribunal or sought to be enforced against an owner, then the tribunal would ultimately say that they are bound by the Court of Appeal's decision, and the tribunal would say that that bylaw is invalid and unenforceable. So it's up to the tribunal or a court to say whether a bylaw is invalid. That is, the Court of Appeal decision said that for the Horizon, didn't say that for all bylaws everywhere. Okay, and that's the reason why those who believe that the legislation needs to change in this area are still advocating for that change, because the minute the legislation changes, then we have a different story. Then indeed your bylaws may be invalid on their face. So that's something to be wary of and be careful of. But definitely Fair Trading's advice is, and I agree, to make sure that you review your bylaws. If you have a pet ban, go and chat to a Strata lawyer and get your head around that and see what your options are with reviewing that in the face of this decision. So while their email advice this week was that blanket pet ban bylaws are all invalid, if you now go to their website where they talk about bylaws, and I think I've got a link there for us, Rochelle, we'll just pop it in the comments, that position has been amended a bit. A clever Strata lawyer might have told them that wording needed to be changed. So it now clearly says that the Court of Appeal decision overturned the particular bylaw that was in dispute and provided a general ruling about the law on harsh, unconscionable or oppressive bylaws. So we'll pop a link there to that page if you want to go and check it out. Bit confused? Are you a bit confused about this bylaws saga we're all going through in New South Wales? I don't blame you. That is understandable. But of course, as always, I am here helping you out. And I have a little something for you coming up in a couple of weeks' time. It will be a webinar. I will be talking about this case. I will be talking about its impact on not just pet bylaws, but on bylaws generally, and why it is that we need to now be doing a health check on our bylaws, a pressure test perhaps, and make sure that we are not on the wrong side of the law when the time comes. So something around the corner for you there. Stay tuned and I will be giving you the details about that. The other thing that is around the corner, in addition to our special guest, who I'm bringing on very soon, is that I will be opening up the membership doors before the year is out. So membership to our online community, Your Strata Property. A number of you are on the wait list for membership. The doors are not always open and some clever cookies get themselves on the wait list while the doors are closed. It's a good time to get yourself on the wait list because if you are there, you are the first ones to know when the door opens. And I always have a very special bonus for our waitlisters as well. So good time to be checking out the membership. Rochelle is going to pop the link to that page to learn more about the membership into our comment section. I am seeing, first of all, I've lost my sunlight. And I've just gone back to my screen here and seeing how fluorescent I am. So I apologize for that, guys. We'll sort that out. I'm seeing lots of you coming in and saying hi. Colin is looking forward to his first Friday with me. Good to see you, Colin. Thank you for joining us all here. Nicholas is here, or Nick. Hey, Gary, nice to see you. And Heidi is here. Heidi's saying, I'm not in an apartment, but I would hate not to be able to have my fur babies living with me. Yeah, your beautiful fur babies, Heidi. Very important to have them with us. Mine is out in the lounge room at the moment. All right, excellent. Now I am going to welcome in our special guest for today and to make sure that I give him all the accolades here that he deserves. I am just making sure I've got the right screen in front of me. Today, of course, we are chatting with Paul Morton. And it is not the first time that I have chatted to Paul way back in episode number 73 of the podcast. We talked about the 3 ways to fund your strata building. You can go and check out that episode with Paul. If you like what he has to say here today, it's definitely worth going to have a listen back to that podcast episode. Paul, as I know so many of you know, is the CEO of Lanark Strata Finance. From a symphony orchestra to working in a bank to a prestigious overseas business school to founding Australia's leading strata finance company, Paul Morton has covered a lot of ground. He has degrees in music and economics, as well as postgraduate finance and management degrees, and is a Sloan Fellow of Stanford University. Paul is deeply engaged in the strata industry. He is acknowledged as the country's subject matter expert in the economics of strata plans. I know so many of you will know Paul, have heard him speak before, and it is my privilege to have him here with us today. I'm bringing you on now, Paul. Paul Morton, hello.
Hi, Amanda. It's great to be here. It's pretty good.
It's a pleasure to have you here. And I'm glad you're here next to me. I'm very pleased to have you here next to me now because now I can take the pressure off and I can rejig my lights, move them around here. I get lost with when daylight saving comes and all the lighting starts changing at different hours of the day. I have to change my studio setup, the burdens of live video here. Do you have that problem, Paul?
Oh, no, just our sleeping patterns are all over the place.
No. Yes.
Between the family, the human people and the canine people, we're all over the shop.
Oh yes, that too. And you don't have little humans. I have a little human, and yes, that causes problems with little humans as well as the canines. I get it.
Well, my little human got taller than me a couple of months ago, so I'm the shortest person in the family now.
Oh gosh, doesn't take long, does it? Well, it is lovely to see you. You and I regularly catch up, or we used to regularly catch up in a past life when we'd go to conferences together. And you have always been a big supporter of our Australian College of Strata Lawyers and our annual conference. You've been lucky enough to have a bit of a coveted position there, being our exclusive supporter of our lawyers' conferences. How did that happen?
Oh, look, I think I'd have to tell you my lawyer joke.
Go
And
for
my
it.
lawyer joke is that I love lawyers. That at so many times in my career and also in my personal life, lawyers are the people who have helped sort out problems. And, look, it's sometimes easy for some lawyers, you can do that, you can't do that, you can do that, you can't do that. But the real issue is that most of life doesn't exist at, those weird boundaries way out
Mm-hmm.
there. Most of life is somewhere in the middle where there are very subjective decisions to be made. And I've just been really lucky in my commercial life to be talking to lawyers who can walk you through it and say, look, potentially you could end up in that bad spot over there. But the reality is you're more likely to be here. And I think a lawyer has to be a lawyer. We need you people to tell us exactly what's right and what's wrong in a legal sense. But the lawyer who combines that with commercial judgment and heaven, the wonderful ones who can also put some value judgment and morality into that as well. If you find one of those, or not if, because they're not hard to find, when you find one of those, it's just fantastic. So maybe it's just my overall attitude to lawyers that they let me come to their conferences. I think I
Well,
was just
thank
lucky that I
you.
was allowed in.
Thank you for saying that. And thank you for leading with that very nice lawyer joke, particularly after my day today, where I was accused of being intimidating.
They could have been right, Amanda.
The silence was deafening there, Paul. I don't think I'm intimidating at all. I like to remind people who need reminding what the law is, particularly when it comes to the keeping of books and records, but I try not to be intimidating, surely.
Oh, look, I couldn't possibly say anything about that.
Love it. Well, here we go. I want to ask you a few questions now that we have you here. You said
And
this to
now
me.
I'm the person who's intimidated. Now, come on.
You said to me recently that you're fascinated about the economics of strata schemes, and there is something very interesting about being a strata lender. That piqued my interest. I want to know what's so fascinating and what's so interesting about strata lending.
Um, it's one of my favorite topics. The reason I stopped there is, where do I stop? Where do I start? But more importantly, where do I stop? Because I think we've only got a half an hour or so, and I can bang on for an awful long time. So a couple of the highlights on fascinating things about the economics of strata. And I'd also like to cover, if it's okay with you, the interesting things about money in general, but particularly debt, because that's what we talk about. The biggest one, I think, is that so few people have actually stopped to think about the efficient and the right and the proper way to fund a strata scheme. Now, there's this general view, and this is where I talk about the economics of strata rather than just, sinking funds and admins funds and whatever. I think most politicians, most strata managers, and I'm not sure about owners, I think owners are slightly different in this, just have a view that a sinking fund is wonderful and fantastic, must always be there. A special levy is an undesirable fallback if you have to have it, and gosh, borrowing would be the worst thing in the world.
Mm.
When, as financiers, and look, you talked about some of my uni degrees, I've spent a lot of time thinking about finance, I guess from a philosophical type of point of view. As financiers, we know that there's not good and there's not bad. It's the blend and the optimization which is the issue. And so when it comes to the fascinating things about money generally, I think now money is such an integral part of our lives. It's just there, whether just paying for some chips at Woolies like I just did or whatever it is, it's there. Payment mechanisms are part of our lives. But for something which we're so inextricably bound up with, we have so many misconceptions about it. There's so many myths about money. And that's what I think is fascinating. And of course, the myths about money are just exaggerated in a strata corporation because there's 30 people expounding their myths about money rather than just one person. But for example, the start of it is, people saying, well, I hate debt. Well, Australians hate debt. Well, we might say this. We might say that at a dinner party, it might get the appropriate response or something. But the fact is that Australians love debt. And perhaps we love it too much, or perhaps we love it in the wrong ways. This is actually a session about money and finance. We're not talking about relationships here. That's a completely different thing. But we might love it in strange sort of ways. But the thing is, we love to have a mortgage, because if we've got a mortgage, we've got a new house. And that's fantastic. And we forget that actually, just like a balance sheet for a company, assets, liabilities, debt can't exist unless there's an offsetting asset on the other side. And we tend not to think about that. So when people come to thinking about debt in a strata sense, in my strata corporation, they tend to think, well, gee, it's bad to have this debt. You might be having too much. You may and probably do have too little. But it's not that debt is good or bad. It's the mix of it and how it funds the asset which it's bound up with, like that. So to me, when we start to think about these things from a more general point of view, the behavioural aspects, do Australians hate debt? Absolutely not. It's all over our lives, and we do it for good reason. And of course, some people, it's out of control. That's bad. We can talk about that separately, but that's this group of people. It's not this group of people. So I'm trying to put my arms in the screen the right way. And, is debt bad? No, it's not bad. Is debt good? No, it's not good. It's the way that it fits in the balance and how it helps with the efficient funding of an asset, which is good. It can be very, very complex. It can require a working through. But that sort of comes to another one of these myths and conceptions. From my point of view, what's fascinating is that I maybe it was my own naivety at the start of things. You tend to think that money ought to be simple. It's numbers. You can add them up, you can divide them, and you can work out percentage rates, and that's really good. But the thing is, money, there's an aspect of money which should be like that. But for many Australians, money is extremely emotional.
Oh, yeah.
And decisions about money can get incredibly emotional in the general meeting. And that's not by itself bad, but it's bringing the blend of them together and saying, okay, how do we actually work this in an integrated way and think there's the money here, whether it's debt or a sinking fund or something else, which is used to being fund the asset over here. How do we make the right decision with that? Rather than just flooding the area with our emotions and our prejudices to say spending money is bad, a sinking fund is bad, borrowing is bad, or whatever it is people might be thinking of. Look, I've rambled a lot around there, so maybe you can bring me on track with a specific question.
Yeah, for sure. I want to dig into the borrowing is bad point, because what I'm wondering, Paul, something that you've taught me over the years is that people are not just getting a strata loan so that they can pay a big legal bill, or that's kind of the worst thing that you can have to do, or that they need to repair some concrete cancer, or just these things that just have to be done. We can't afford it right now, so we're borrowing. I've learned that people are getting strata loans to do value add projects, to add balconies where they didn't have balconies, do new balustrades, to do aesthetic work, things that they don't have to do, but they want to do because they want to add value. I'm wondering if that's the key there to that mindset of borrowing is bad because we're borrowing for this reason. Borrowing is great when we can see that we're adding value, investing for the future. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, do you see that as well? Is that a difference in your clients? Some of them are coming to you with their heads hanging down, oh, we wish we didn't have to. And others are coming to you really excited because they can't wait to use this money to improve their investment.
Yeah, I think we need a whiteboard here. We need something I can draw on. Maybe we can do that for next time. There's a few ways to do it. And if I could put some bullet points, might be easier, but maybe I can do a PowerPoint something later and we can share that around, that sort of thing. Let's take because I think you're taking a really good step into a particular aspect of thinking about the economics of a strata scheme. Let's go back and be slightly general for a bit and then jump in through that same window you were looking in. I think one way we can distinguish between things is operational items and capital items. So let's take as an operational item the lighting bill, the heating bill, the cleaning bill, those sorts of things, short-term things. Now, long-term debt to pay for those, I'd say almost universally, because I'm sure there's an exception, is a bad thing. But it can happen that you've got a spike in these cash flows, and we're coming up with a spike in cash flows now. It's called Christmas.
Yep.
So,
COVID, I was going to say.
Well, that's been a bit of a problem as well. But let's think of the Christmas example. Now, okay, so various households, they have Christmas expenses coming up. It's greater than their normal monthly or weekly inflow. What are you going to do? There's the choice of making a physical change. Let's have Christmas in April. That way we've got time to save for it. Well, that's just ludicrous. What we do is we use too much on our credit cards, but we pay it over the successive couple of months, hopefully as few as possible. And the reason is that debt is a really good instrument for shifting cash flows. So there's a spike in our outflows at Christmas, but we cover that with the credit card and it gets paid back, should get paid back over the next appropriate period, a few months or maybe a little bit longer, but hopefully shorter. And so debt there is smoothing a cash flow. It's a good application of debt when it comes to an operational item. But taking out a 10-year loan to pay for a Christmas present or to pay for the cleaning or lighting bill in Strata, bad idea. Let's now turn this around to what you're talking about. And you're saying about in a sense, the grudging thing. We have to fix this concrete cancer. We don't have cash around. How are we going to fund it? And you're talking about the exciting project. So I'll do the boring one first and then we'll do the exciting one later. There's a sense in which they're actually the same decision. It's the lens through which you view it. Because if you're fixing that concrete cancer, you're taking the value of your building back up to where it ought to be. There's a conceptual gap here because people think my apartment, which is affected by what's going around it, the common property, it's worth this much. I have to spend this money for concrete cancer. No. With concrete cancer, your apartment's worth this much. You have to invest in fixing the concrete cancer to getting it back up. So my first point would be it's still an investment decision. How you fund it, well, there's several ways of doing it. We can talk about that later, but you're making an investment decision to restore value. It's a bit hard to come to grips with because notionally we think our value is here in the first place. And the really difficult thing, and sometimes I'm the person who has to deliver the message, is sorry guys, your value is here, but you can restore it by investing. Now, the other one is a really great, simple, clear example of investing. And as an example, I'll use one of our favourite clients, which is Strata Plan 1731. Should trip off your tongue. Everyone knows what that one is. It's a building in Tamarama. And if you've ever been in the eastern suburbs of Sydney, it is a huge, horrible, rectangular blot of the landscape. There's 78 apartments. There's no balconies. There's 2 fire orders. There's concrete cancer. There's not enough car parking, all of that sort of stuff. Now, it's been a long-term project and next year it'll be finished. So it's gathering momentum now and it's just fantastic. If you go and look at the building, the scaffolding everywhere. But what they decided is we could spend X. Look, I just use simple rough numbers. They're not the real numbers. We could spend $10 million to fix the concrete cancer and those sorts of things. And yes, we've restored value to our property, but so what? Let's spend double that. It's actually more, but I'm just keeping the math simple. Spend double of that. And so what they're getting for investing double the amount of money, and I use the word spend, I should have used invest. By investing double the amount of money, they're getting all those problems fixed, but they're digging a 4-story hole in the backyard to have an underground car park for everybody. They're replacing one lift and they're building a second lift. Every unit, all with 180-degree ocean views, and no balconies, is now going to have a balcony. And by the way, they're putting 2 penthouses on the top. They'll sell those and they'll bring it back to the original amount. So for the same amount of investment, they have got so much more amenity, floor space increased by 25%. You can imagine balconies with all that sort of stuff. The value is going through the roof. And it's just a pleasure. It's exciting every time we talk to them because they can see the return coming on their investment. And that's really what it comes to. If you're thinking about any kind of money thing in Strata, if you think of it like, I have to spend the money, it's an expense, then you are going to have a shortened, frustrated, upset life because you're always going to be upset, aggravated, irritated about the whole thing. But it's actually an easy thing to fix because you're thinking the wrong way. You're thinking expense when the actual word is investment. Now, as soon as you think of the word investment, the very next step is, what's my return on that investment? Maybe your investment and the return is you just feel good. You like coming home to a painted apartment, or you like coming home to a place where there's better security, or whatever it is which is going to improve amenity. That's perfect. Or you can measure it in financial returns. And you can say, because we've done these things to our property, because we've invested, I'm now getting more rent for my rental property. About 60% of Strata properties are rented. This will give me more rent. Or when I come to sell it, I'm going to get a better amount, a better capital return. And those are the two ways, short-term income and the long-term capital gain when you exit the property. Those are the two forms of return. They're the two things which give you a return on an investment. We measure that in percentages, and that can get quite complex. But the concept is, I'm investing, I want a return. What's my return going to be? The funny thing is, this is where the sort of the emotional and the financial or the numbers come together. Because there's this view, I believe, that residential owner-occupiers saying, we're interested in lifestyle. We're not interested in capital gain or financial return. And they create a big divide, and the investors do the same thing. They create the big divide on the other side. We're interested in financial return. We're not interested in lifestyle. Look, those are the two biggest furphies, completely ridiculous things in Strata that you could ever think of. I don't know of a home owner who is not ultimately interested in the value of their property and how much it's going to sell for, whether it's for the kids or to donate to the cat's home or their next property, whatever it would be. Residential owner-occupiers have to be concerned about capital value. And any investor who thinks that they can ignore lifestyle has got rocks in their head, probably shouldn't be an investor. It's the lifestyle of your tenant, the way they feel when they walk up the path and into the foyer and into the lift. It's the lifestyle of all those things which will determine how much rent they pay and how much that person ultimately will pay you in capital value. So this concept, and it sort of comes back to these fascination things, this concept that residential owner-occupiers are over here and they want lifestyle, and the investors are over here and they want financial return, complete rubbish. You've got to be interested in both. And if you're interested in lifestyle, actually the other things will follow.
I really like that. And I'm sure you are arming many of our viewers with an excellent argument there to take to their general meetings when they're advocating for these kinds of loans, these financial instruments, and having to deal with those oppositional groups, investors, owner-occupiers. I think that's an excellent way of explaining the realities to each. We are going to get into some practicalities, or I'd like to get into some practicalities, Paul, and answer for some of our viewers how these loans work, what are the documents involved, how long does it take, is there security, does my bank need to know about it? But before we do that, I do want to encourage anyone who is tuning in, if you have questions for Paul, I introed him earlier, and he is the guru. He's the man. You hearing it, guys. I don't have to say it. You're watching it. So if you have a question about a Strata loan, feel free to pop it into the comments. If you're thinking about it, he's giving me a look now, like, really, Amanda, putting me on the spot here. If you're thinking about a loan and you have a question, if you have one and you have a question, feel free to pop it into the comments. And I'm hoping we'll have time today. We will head back over there and answer your questions. I am seeing a few more of you saying hello since I last checked. Hi, John, who is in in Melbourne. It is good to see you. I hope all is well and you're partying, not too hard, just attending the local cafe is good for now. Michael, hello. Gary's giving me a smiley face, and Sean is here. Good to see you. Okay, so Paul, how do you kick off this process? If somebody is committee or a strata manager even who the committee asked them to investigate this, what's the first step to finding out more about the strata loan process, and what's the first thing you do with a potential new borrower?
Okay, well, it's just a matter of picking up the phone. There's a few strata lenders around. I mean, obviously Lanark is the best, but ring around, find out for yourself who you think is the best. So on that comment, I would have earlier on, I might have said something about rates in the sense of people get fixated on the rate. Now, the rate is important.
The interest rate?
Yeah, the interest rate.
Yeah.
It's important. It's the cost of money, but it's just the visible element of the cost of money. With any relationship with any service provider, service is actually really critical. So consider that one as well. Hard to measure, hard to quantify, hard to sort of say, oh, but it's worth X% because of the service, but it's there. And the other one are the fees. I don't know, probably Amanda, because you're a professional, you've been talking to banks about a mortgage and they've said, well, look, here's our rate, but if you join our professionals package, here's the rate. And it sounds very good because they're going to do so many wonderful things, invite you to all these cocktail parties and all these sorts of things, which don't turn out to be as much fun as they say. But anyway. And oh, by the way, there's this $10 a month fee, or you have to pay X dollars a year, or the annual fee and whatever. Same with credit cards, the fee credit cards. What the lenders know that you don't is exactly what that fee translates to in terms of rate. And they're very good at making those calculations, and most of us are not. And that's where it's really important to be able to pull things back in together. Mm-hmm. So I just made a quick aside there about other things apart from the rate, interest rate being to be included in the cost of money. But pick up the phone, get in touch with a lender, and get in touch with 2 or 3 of them and find out what they do. How do they respond to your phone call? How do they help you through the process? What's the quality of the material that they give you? Can you understand it? All of those sorts of things. But the simple thing is make the call either to your strata manager or to a lender and get whatever the collateral materials that they are to help explain the loan. That's just starting to get information. There'll need to be discussions and talks and committees. That ultimately, there'll be a decision in a general meeting. Almost always strata lenders want you to have a decision in a general meeting. Even if the law doesn't specifically require it, for some tiny instance, they tend to want that. Now, how does it work? Find out how much you can borrow. That would be the first one. I think one of the problems that people have when approaching this is that they come from this sort of narrow, blinkered version of sort of scarcity. It's sort of, I think mortgage lenders have been responsible for that, because everybody wants to bet a wonderful house. It always costs 10% more than you can afford. And so therefore you're always wanting a mortgage, which is 10% more than maybe you should. And so you're going to the lender and they're looking at it, and to me, the bank is someone, you ask them for 100,000, but actually you're a bit worried they might say no. So you ask them for 90,000, even though you need 100. And then after a while and much discussion, whatever, they come back and they approve 80,000. They're all excited. They expect you to be really happy, and you sort of are, but it's not what you needed, which is more. So we've got this sort of thing in strata about scarcity. And I think the same thing happens when we're talking about, I don't know, fixing the roof or whatever the capital work might be, putting on balconies, the uplift type project. We tend to think we have to spend this money and there's no money around, so what's the cheapest we can get? Really simple. There's a really good reason why cheap and nasty are almost always in the same sentence. That's not a return on investment type approach. The other thing that people might be saying is, well, we don't have much money, so this is the amount of money we can get. What can we get for X $1,000s? Well, it's the same sort of thing. The real thing is, what is the project which will give us the greatest return on investment? Do we get the best ROI from this $50,000 job or this $200,000 job? And it's not clear. But people think 50,000 because they're thinking of scarcity. Now, most strata lenders will probably lend you the amount or even more the amount that you're thinking of. So that, first of all, takes the shackles off and the constraints off and allows you to think about the right value proposition, the right return on investment, rather than what's the cheapest job we can possibly get done and what's the easiest way to fund it. So that's a good thing that I think a strata lender will do for you.
Let me just ask you about that, Paul, before you move on. How
Yeah.
often do you see buildings engaging consultants who can help them to make that decision? Because I imagine coming to you and saying, this is how much we want, and then you coming back and saying, oh, well, I can give you a whole lot more. Immediately, the client's going to think, well, I thought you would say that. You would say that. But what you're saying intellectually makes a lot of sense. I'm wondering if buildings engage, and you'd see whether or not it's common on your side, engage somebody who they may see is on their side, who can give them that kind of advice and say, well, borrow this much, this is what it is, borrow this much, this is the return on investment. I would think there's an important role for that kind of a person.
I think there is. And sadly, in my 15 years of thinking about these issues and lending in strata, I've rarely seen the individual, and there's certainly no sector providing good advice in this. So it is a real struggle. There is no, as far as I'm aware, no, there is no, because I'm aware of it all nationally, there is no good, objective wealth management advice for strata corporations. It's just missing. And that's a great shame. The next thing is that I would query a lot of the advice that is given to individuals as owners, because I think it's very hard to give that advice. And look, this could be a short discussion on the wealth management, the financial advice industry. I have a lot of sympathy for financial advisors, because what they should be doing is charging like lawyers. You should say, this guy's a great financial advisor. I am delighted to pay $1,000, $2,000 per hour for the benefit of their wisdom. But people go in saying, I want the free advice. It's worth what you pay for it. So the industry gets locked into this model of clients expecting free advice. And therefore, the people who are providing it get paid by the providers of the investments that they do. Now, that's enough on that. What it's pointing to in the personal world, it's very hard to get good advice there. And certainly when it comes to advice to an individual about the best way of funding in the strata corporation, we know that's non-existent, because we know most of the intellectual property about that exists in our company. And so it's limited to the people who are contacting us. It is a huge void. It's not quite as bad as it seems, though, because actually sometimes people's intuition is pretty good. Let me give you an example. I think there are about 3 million apartment owners in Australia, whether they, 40% are owner occupiers and 60% investors. Say to almost any one of them, here's $20,000, use it to improve the value of your apartment. And intuitively, like that, they know what bang for their buck they get in their case out of that $20,000. In my case, it's the carpets, or in my case, okay, tart up the kitchen and completely do the bathroom, or whatever it might be. People know intuitively how to invest that money on the inside of their apartment. They're not taking that wider and thinking, how do we invest the money on the outside? They're affected by the scarcity problem that I talked about. They're affected by the fact that strata is quite democratizing, and the rather foolish person tends to get the same amount of airtime as the incredibly smart person. But usually what I find is driving this value decision is a champion in the strata who can see where the value comes from. Now, Glenview Towers, Illawong Avenue, I'm talking about, the champion there is the chairman, and has been the chairman, Christine Smetzers, who for the last 15 years has been leading that building. And she is just a powerhouse of being able to get people to see the vision and move along with it. So it's not that it doesn't happen, but it rarely comes from the external person. It tends to come from inside the corporation. And often people are suspicious. If I'm the builder and I'm coming to you and I'm saying, look, I can do this job for 100,000, I can do that job for 200,000, you think I'm just trying to upsell you. When builders who often have great advice and great intentions find that it's difficult to have that conversation because people are skeptical. But when it comes from within, when it's a member of the owner group itself, which is saying, this is where our future and our vision can be, though when that happens, it's just fantastic. All you nascent champions and advocates out there, gird your loins, have extra wheeze for breakfast, whatever it takes. Get involved, because what you do will actually improve the value and the lifestyle and the capital return and all those things of everybody in your community.
Yeah.
It's incredible how powerful things are. Stephen Goddard, who used to be president of the Owner Corporation Network, he had this concept of strata being parish pump politics. And that was sort of in a negative sense. But in a positive sense, it's a local community, and your ability to improve things, to actually effect change for the better of your local community, is really, really strong. And the people who can take that up and make it work, it's just fantastic when you see it happening. We
So
were
let's
supposed
say
to talk about how to get a strata loan.
that's all right. I'm bringing you back on track. Let's say we have one of these buildings that has this champion and they've been chatting to you and the strata manager's involved and they're keen to go ahead. You're recommending that they put the loan agreement, which is the document that is put forward, to a general meeting. Do people take time to get legal advice on these documents? Do you see that very often?
Not often enough, I think. I mean, we recommend it, and I think any prudent lender would recommend. I think people should do it more than they do. Actually, maybe this could be a topic for a future Strata Lawyers Conference, because I've seen a lot of good legal advice. Actually, only a small portion do it. I don't know, less than 10%, maybe even
If I
much
can
less than
say
that.
there, jump in here with that. I mean, how many of us get advice on the terms of our mortgage? We just go, oh, that's what the bank says. That's where they're not going to change anything. So what's the point? I'll just sign it. I imagine that's the mentality.
It could be. And look, that's actually, in a sense, quite sensible because, for example, as flexible and as wonderful and as fantastic as the company I developed is, we don't change our documents either.
Yeah.
But I think that advice has to be appropriate to the situation. I saw one recently which was 66 paragraphs long, and I think it
The
was
advice.
longer than our loan. The advice was. It was longer than our loan agreement. The first section of it was devoted repeating things which are in the loan agreement. Well, so what? If you're going to read a complex legal document, you can just go to the source. We don't need a third party to say that. A third of it was just rubbish. Well, I shouldn't say it was just rubbish. It was this person's opinion of what might happen. And a third of it were things which I thought were just off topic, didn't really help people. Now, I still go to a lot of general meetings. And because I've been to so many, maybe not as many as you have, but I've been to a lot. And often if I'm asked to talk, I make it really short and simple. And I say, well, I've got good news and bad news. The good news is I will lend you 100% of everything that you want in order to invest in whatever it is that you think is the right thing to invest. Because everybody has slightly different lending criteria. And if you make the call to the lenders, you'll find that out. But in our case, if the Strata Corporation is legally allowed to do something, we will lend to it so that it can fund it. So if it's allowed to engage a lawyer, we will lend to them for that. If it's allowed to fix its balconies, we will lend to them from that, whatever it would be. So we're coming along saying that, and so that's the good news. The bad news is you have to pay it all back with interest. Are there any questions? Now, the questions actually tend to be technical things like, what's the maximum term you can borrow for? Well, that depends between lenders. It's typically between 7 and 15 years, depending on the lender. What's the shortest term? That varies too. Typically, it's between 3 years with some lenders, and with us, there's no minimum term. But why would you borrow for just a month? Doesn't make any sense from our point of view. What's the maximum amount you can borrow? So each lender will have their maximum amount. In our case, we have a sliding scale based on the loan to value ratio. So if there's more than 20 lots in the property, we'll lend up to 35% of the value. So that's a way of working that out. But then there becomes the interesting things like, should you have an initial period of interest only? Well, it's available from lenders at various amounts. Should you fix the rate? The initial year or two can be fixed for some lenders at various costs, those sorts of things. So just going back a little bit on the technical aspects of the Strata loan, it's an unsecured loan. So there's no mortgage, there's no guarantees, caveats, liens, charges, nothing, any kind of security. It just doesn't exist when someone's lending to an owner corporation.
Mm.
The next one is that it depends on the particular lender, but mostly they are not asking for financial statements from the individual owners, which is what you'd have to do if you went to a bank to increase your mortgage or something like that. Owners are not guaranteeing the loans. If you're on the committee, you bear no special responsibility. If you're the person authorised to sign the loan document, you bear no particular responsibility, except if you do it fraudulently or in error. I mean, then there's a ton of bricks that'll come down crashing on your head very quickly. But just because you've signed the document, you're not signing it in your personal name. No, I'm not guaranteeing this $10 million loan.
Mm.
I am executing a document between the corporation and this lender. And so therefore I'm evidencing that the corporation has gone into this loan, not me personally or the committee personally. A frequent comment is that many people have is to think that the Strata manager is borrowing the money. Well, no, they're not.
I don't think the Strata manager would be happy with that.
But they're not doing that. So unsecured loan, I've talked about potential terms that's based on the lender, things like interest-only periods. The amount of money is typically more than the Strata Corporation would be requiring to need. Only a few cases in our history have we had people come to us wanting to borrow more than we were prepared to lend. Actually, there was one case this week. But then it's a matter of what's the mix between a special levy and borrowing that's right in the particular situation. There's usually a solution.
What about tax implications for individual owners? Are there some benefits there with the Strata loan or downsides of some sort?
How do I answer this one? Yes, but I'm not allowed to tell you. Let me be a bit less flippant. So first of all, I'm not a tax advisor. This is not tax advice. I'm a lender. I am allowed to tell you what lending means. I know a hell of a lot about the economics of strata schemes, so I can talk all day about that, but I am not a tax advisor. Let me talk about it generally, though. There are actually 4 types of owners in strata. There's the residential owner-occupier, and there's the investor. And if it's a commercial strata building, then you fit into one of the investor categories. It's obviously not residential. So of the investors, there are personal investors. You own a property and you might own it in your own name, an investment property that is. Or maybe you have a company which owns the property, or maybe it's owned by your super fund. That's 4 types of owners. Each of them have a completely different tax profile. The next thing is that there are 4 relevant taxes. There's income tax for the owner, there's income tax for the corporation, there's capital gains tax, and there's GST. Now, GST applies if your levies are above a particular threshold, but it applies to everybody. There are some people who will get a tax input credit for that, so that's a complicating factor. Capital gains tax is only relevant for the investors, and income tax for the person is only relevant, or for the owner is only relevant for the investors, but income tax for the corporation is relevant for everybody because you're all paying into the corporation. Now, the next one, people with me so far? So 4 types of owners, 4 types of taxes.
Clear as mud.
The next one is there are 3 ways of funding the corporation. Now, strata managers can get very concerned about what's a special levy and what's an admin levy and what's a sinking fund levy and those sorts of determinations. One way to think about levies is it's really simple. There's 2 types of levies. You can have a small number of large levies. That's the big special levy. Or you can have a large number of small levies. That's either while you accumulate money in a sinking fund or while you service a loan. But those things can then be recategorized as whether they're admin or levies to the sinking fund. So a special levy is a levy to the sinking fund. A sinking fund levy obviously is. 3 types of levies have completely different consequences for the 4 types of taxes, which have completely different consequences for each of the 4 types of owners. Now,
Right.
I wanted to talk through that partly to make it simple. If we chunk it down, we can understand it. I haven't gone the next level about the amounts. We'd be here all day and it'd be just boringly, nine-numberedly horrible, and no one would be drinking their champagne at the end of this. But understanding it in that way can see the tax benefits or the implications for tax of each of the three forms of funding are sufficiently important for investors to pay attention to it. So if I could put it that way, if you're an investor owner in Strata, then investigating how those three types of levies play out for the four types of taxes in your particular situation is very much worth your while.
Okay, good to know. And what about this? Might be my last question for you, Paul. And these times fly. I'm looking up at my clock, thinking,
Gosh,
you're not surprised that you could talk about strata finance for this long. My
we'll
last
check
question.
on the listeners and see if they're still awake.
Oh, they're all here. They're all on the edge of their seats. I can see them. Repayment. I get asked a lot about repayment. I see this when I'm working with buildings who may have a loan. They've got the loan, they've done the work, they've got maybe it's a 7, 8, 10-year term, but they're ready. They want to pay it out. They want to raise a levy and they want to pay it out. Can they do that? Is there any downside to doing that? Another thing that I get asked is can individual owners pay out their share of the strata loan? You probably get asked that too. What's the repayment situation?
Okay, let's divide it into two bits. So the first one is the corporation has extra cash for whatever reason. Can they pay it back early? Yes, they can. The terms and conditions of that will vary between lenders. They're in the contract. But if you never thought the government does anything for you, let me rephrase it. If you think the government never does anything for you, they do here, because any residential building is considered to be a consumer for the purpose of the credit code. The credit code says you cannot charge a penalty. So they can charge an admin fee, and some of them do, but the real thing is you can terminate your loan early if you want to. The law says the lender must accept it and they can't get in the way apart from a few minor admin charges. So that's simple. When does that happen? In our experience, out of hundreds of I think there was one or two situations, probably one, where there was a new committee and they just had a different view of the world and they lobbied and argued and politicked. And so the decision which was made at one general meeting was overturned 2 years later, and they decided they wanted to fund their building another way. So that has happened. It's extremely rare, but it can happen to you. If that's what you think is right in your building, that's what you should do. Go to the general meeting and argue that out and work it out and get the decision made. The second one sort of happens by stealth, which is, over time, the loan balance goes down and there'd be some funds accumulating and things like that. And you get to a point where you say, look, our loan's only $60,000 and we've got 40,000 extra cash. If we just have a special levy from everyone to cover the rest, we'll have paid off the loan. Let's do that. And that happens. Well, it's not rare, but it's not frequent. So what's the right? Not infrequently. Not a lot, but it happens, and it's an understandable and reasonable thing to do. The other one is when somebody gets a windfall. In this case, it's not Aunt Mary dying and leaving money. It's we've been able to put ourselves in a situation to sell some common property. For example, the Glenview Towers building is creating common property, these two new penthouses, in order to sell it. Or you're actually litigating and you get a settlement or you win the court case. There's a windfall like that. Money comes in. There's nothing to prevent you paying off the strata loan. Just go ahead and do it. Now, the other one is quite tricky, and it's sort of not hard to understand, but it's sort of a bit hard to accept because it's not what people really want. It's this idea of, I've got some money. Can I pay off my bit of the strata loan? And usually we hear it at the beginning when we're in a general meeting talk with owners, and there's a group there saying, well, we want the project to go ahead. We've got money. We can pay up front. Okay, the other people can borrow, but we want to pay up front. And the answer is, I'll put this as politely and as simply as I can. No. Can't happen. Now, I'll tell you the reason. The reason is that the corporation doesn't have, if there's 20 owners, it's not 20 levies. It's one levy, which is allocated to the 20 owners by virtue of their unit entitlement. So there's no mechanism in the law to say, hey, you people pay $1,000 now and you people pay X dollars a quarter over whatever period it is. So it's just not set up to do that. So that's just the end of it. But the other aspect of it is that, surprisingly, calculating interest is quite tricky. And calculating things like, well, what happened with the person who paid a day early, or this person who paid 5 days late or 6 days late?
Yeah.
Now, there's an interesting thing on Strata is that we all like to think we're generally amenable people. But in Strata, and this is, I don't mean this as a criticism, because I feel exactly the same way. I want to be fair, but I don't want the person next door to get a better deal than me. And I don't want the other person to be more fair, less fair than me. So the complexity of trying to deal with the financial calculations of payments and interest rates and who's early and who's late and all of those sorts of things, if this was possible, which is not, it's just overwhelmingly dreadful. And my simple view on that is Strata is complex and confusing enough. Let's not try and make it even worse by doing something like that. Now, the thing for those owners who want to pay up front, and if I'm in a general meeting, I've got to be really careful to look down at the floor or something like that, is that some of them, it will be by far the best economic thing for them to pay up front. That's the case. For some people, it will be. But many people don't understand their own cost of funds. And so they look at, they know they've got funds available in some form, and they look at the interest rate of the loan and think, well, I'm going to be servicing that, I don't want to do it. Well, if anyone's got hundreds of thousands of dollars sitting around in their check account, their cost of funds is pretty low, 0.1%, they can tip the money in. But if anybody would have credit card debt after they've paid the special levy, their cost of funds is 20%. Strata loans are a hell of a lot cheaper. Or if it means by paying that special levy, they can't have that holiday, or they can't buy that new car, or they can't give the money to the kids, that's their cost of funds. In finance, there's a concept called opportunity. Now, I'm happy talking about it right now, because when I first started 15 years ago, and I would go to front up to an owners corporation and talk about opportunity costs, no one was interested. I'm amazed now how the general financial knowledge in the community, in the Strata community, has improved over the last 15 years. Because I talk about this in a general meeting now, I've got pretty much 100% engagement from people who are either nodding because they agree, or getting up and shouting because they disagree and they want to argue the point, but at least they're engaged in it.
They get it, yeah. That's the power of the internet, I'd say.
Oh, okay.
Lots of experts out there now.
And that's true, and it's probably easy to find it out. But when you're in the group of people who wants to pay up front, there's two things. One is your cost of funds might not be what it seems. So think about that, and you might get a shock. If you do think about it, you probably will get a shock, but I'll just keep quiet on that because let's take people through it gently. The second one, it comes back to that comment that I quoted Stephen in talking about parish pump politics. The most important way to get return on your investment is to do the right project. Now, I have no idea whether it's the one which is 100,000 or the one which is 200,000, but choosing the right project has the biggest bang for your buck. Spend almost all your efforts on that. The next one, which will get you bang for your buck, is to choose the right contractor. Now, let's say it's the $100,000 one, which happens to be cheap, but in this case is the one which gives you the best ROI. Do you choose this guy at 95,000 or this guy at 110? It's not actually clear. The more expensive one could well be the one who gives you the best result, the best quality, fewer callbacks, all that sort of stuff, the best return on your investment. Spend 99% of your time on that, because those are the things that will give you value for money, bang for your buck, ROI, the biggest thing possible. Yes. Now,
Yep.
if you're one of these people who wants to pay up front, you want that thing to happen. The fact that you might have to accept what for you is a secondary funding option is still not going to detract from getting that positive return on investment, which is where your thoughts should be focused. And I think I've probably banged on enough. I can stop there.
You have given us so much, Paul. I think many of our viewers will be back and re-listening to this. There is lots in here, guys, and I'm glad that we've been able to take this longer format, longer than one of our podcasts, to be able to get all of this out of you. I just want to acknowledge Colin, who has said CSV reimbursement will be relevant in Victoria. So I don't know if that's makes sense to you, Paul.
Yes. No, he's right. And no, we talk a lot to buildings in Victorian buildings which have cladding issues, and also to CSV when it's appropriate. The first thing is that CSV in some cases will be funding up front or coexistent with things. So the bill comes in and the CSV will fund it. The next thing is that they will not be funding anything to do with other kinds of defects. So on the buildings that they choose, if they don't choose your building, then you're on your own talking to us. But if they choose your building, they will fund that, but they will not fund the defect which is uncovered behind the cladding. And so we're offering a co-investment loan there where we will provide the ability to draw. If you don't draw, you're not paying anything, obviously, but the ability to draw should there be other defects uncovered. So we're very happy to talk to people about that. Sometimes, though, it makes much more sense to spend the money first and to deal with CSV later when it comes in the form of reimbursement. And that's exactly when that happens. And that's when you would be going to a lender and saying, now we want to repay all or some or whatever it is that you choose to do. It's a very relevant point, Colin.
Good. Thank you, Colin. And thank you, Paul. I am going to wrap us up there. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and all of those who are watching live, Facebook and LinkedIn, as well as those tuning in afterwards. Paul Morton, I know we have scratched the surface. We had a run sheet, and I think we got through about half of what I wanted to ask you. So lots more. Do you want to leave us with where you want people to go to find out more about you, or anything special that you've got to offer buildings at the moment?
No, I don't want anybody to do that. They will find us when they need us. I want everybody to think of, I'll try with one, return on investment. What that means is stop thinking about things as an expense. Think about them as an investment, even if it is that concrete cancer thing. Think of the investment that you're making. Work out the best way to get the best return on your investment. And if you're taking that approach, the funding will just all work out. You don't need to worry about that.
Yep. Excellent note to leave us on. I'm wishing everybody a fabulous weekend in Strata. And if you've enjoyed watching this afternoon, please do give us a thumbs up, give us a love heart, help Facebook get this out to as many people as possible. Share it with your groups, with your neighbors, with your buildings. All really important information. And thank you, Paul, for sharing your expertise. Go have a Friday night drink and relax after a hard week.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Amanda.
No worries. Bye, everybody.